interest to you. Please put any questions in the chat box and they will be picked up. Equally, if you've got any technical queries, put them in the chat box as well, and where possible, we will try and deal with them. Keep your questions as clear and concise as possible. And you're muted by default when you enter. Please remain muted, and the session is going to be recorded. So this is a summary session of all of the parallel sessions from today, and it's my pleasure to announce the chair for this session, my friend and colleague, Ruth Segal, who is an SSRP Research Fellow. So over to you, Ruth. Really looking forward to this session.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for attending on this. Well, it's a very hot day in the UK, so well done for everyone for making it to the end of the day. But we've had many really interesting parallel sessions today. Certainly the ones I joined were fascinating, and it's only a shame that we can't all go to all of them. But I understand from Fiona, obviously they've all been recorded and there've been note takers in all of them. So hopefully after the whole event is over, we'll be able to catch up maybe on ones that we've missed. In the meantime, we hope these sessions at the end of the day, the wrap up, will give you a flavour of the parallel sessions that you weren't able to attend. So we are going to ask each of the chairs of the sessions to give a brief 2 or 3 minute overview of what was discussed in their parallel session, and then after that we'll be opening the floor for questions, and then returning to the chairs for a final reflections on the day as a whole. Now, a few of the chairs need to leave early because of being in different time zones, etc. So we're not going to go in the order that the sessions happened, just to keep everyone on their toes. So the first session that we're going to go to, if I can ask Sarah Roberts to report back on the session on Indigenous peoples, climate change adaptation and protected areas, lessons from South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, and thanks very much for, it's hot here as well, I'm in Amsterdam, and thank you for the opportunity to go first and also for the opportunity to present today. So today in our session, we talked about a pilot project, a pre-COVID pilot project coordinated by 3 organisations: the Resilience Institute, a not-for-profit organisation, South African National Parks, and the Agricultural Research Centre, or Agricultural Research Council of South Africa, in conjunction with the Nama Indigenous people that live around Richtersveld National Park. The team also worked with some university students from the University of Western Cape. It was an exciting project as we were invited in by the Indigenous people and worked very closely with the Nama people on what's called a LEAP, an early learning early action plan on climate change and the impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations. The plan also works on what local communities can do to adapt to climate change. We did research into households who maybe climate change isn't at the forefront of their thinking. We had some fantastic questions at the end, especially from Sussex University, so thank you for that. And we're really looking for potential partnerships and to do more of this work in other protected heritage areas. So it's really looking at climate change in terms of adaptation, but working in a holistic way with Indigenous communities, with academic communities, with the scientific community, working together to come up with action plans to address the impacts of climate change for some of the most vulnerable people. And I think that's probably my time.
Thank you so much. That was brief and succinct and very, very clear. Thank you. I've got lots of questions. Next, could we go please to Beth Roberts from Landesa to report back on the session on securing gender equitable and socially inclusive land rights to advance the climate change and SDG agendas.
Sure. Thanks so much, Ruth. And no immediate relation to Sarah that I know of, but nice to see another Roberts amongst the session leads. Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much to all of you. And thanks, Ruth. It was great to have you in our session as well. So I was hosting the panel with a couple of Landesa colleagues. So we do advocacy at the global level, as well as implementation at the national level on climate action and the SDGs and the human rights agendas. And so we work on land governance and land rights for the approximately 2.5 billion people who depend on land and natural resources for a living, either predominantly or partially. And I lead our gender equality and social inclusion work, and we mainstream that throughout our work. So our session was focused on gender equality and social inclusion and across those agendas, and why land matters in climate action and the SDGs and human rights. And we were talking about national human rights as a national level agent for implementation of the SDGs and climate action agendas, as well as SDG reporting at the national level and at the global level, and the links between those two levels, and as well as some of the challenges for climate action reporting and linking climate action reporting to land rights and land rights as a foundation for climate action. So why does land matter for climate action, and how does sustainable land management incentivize climate action, and why is that important for understanding the links between all three of these global agendas? So we had a really great opportunity to engage with all of you that were in the session on those questions, and we really would welcome engagement from any of the folks who are in attendance from this symposium. If you'd like to follow up with us, please feel free to get in contact with me. My email is Beth and then r@landesa.org. We'd really love to hear from any of you. And I think I'll just keep it there. Happy to answer any questions during the question time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Beth. That's a very succinct summary of a rich and complex session, so thank you. Next, I'd like to turn to Shova Tapakaki, please, to talk about the circular economy and sustainable consumption approaches to achieving the climate and SDG agendas.
So much, Ruth. In our session, as Ruth mentioned, a predominant focus was on the role of circular economy in addressing sustainable development goals. We had a good combination of practitioners as well as academics. So in their presentation, they highlighted some of the positive steps that have been happening in the context of the circular economy. So one of the presenter highlighted the role of social enterprises and cooperatives in creating decent as well as inclusive jobs. And in their research from their organization, Circular Economy, they found out that social enterprises as well as cooperatives they can actually do more in terms of supporting governments in innovative policy making. We had a couple of academics looking at, okay, what has been happening in terms of circular economy in corporate field. So there have been variations in terms of how circular economy is understood as well as adopted by businesses. And what they found in their research is that most of the organizations, they are under implementing those high value business models that have been identified by the circular economy, which is repair, reuse, and the predominant focus has been on recycling and reuse. And they also found that there are sector-specific gaps in terms of knowledge and limited research in health sector as well as communications. And we had an interesting discussion where it was, in a way, somehow concluded within these issues that probably the choice for adopting the practices were also because of those practices having the opportunity or the potential to generate income to the corporations. And we have another presentation where the author, the presenter, were looking into, are there certain prioritization differences between high income and low income countries? And what the presenter found out was that there were high prioritization on resource efficiency, waste and recycling, and raising awareness, but low prioritization in business practices and as well as existing practices. And that in low income countries, waste recycling is not as much prioritized as in developed countries. Finally, from bringing the African perspective, the final presenter explored how circular economy can actually contribute in developing food systems at the city level by developing and expanding peri-urban food systems for job creation, as well as creating local food and distributing surplus food produce. And they also focused on, in terms of regenerating farming in the city area. The presenters also highlighted some of the challenges, and one of the challenges that came across among all of the presenters were the lack of circular economy regulatory framework, not only in developing countries, but also in developed country, which is affecting the implementation of the circular economy to its full potential. And the lack of data as well as evidence in the developing country context also, in a way, reduces in developing the local capacities in those countries. And while circular economy, when it started, the focus was much more on environmental issues. It is slowly moving on to the social issues and generating social equalities as well as solving societal problems. However, what was common across all the presenters were that there is still a gap between linking circular economy ideas with climate change agenda. And in academic and in practices, or mostly in corporate circular economy practices, governance haven't been well represented. So what does this mean in terms of our session is that, well, the good thing is that evidence, case studies, data, they are rising from developed and developing countries, which provides many of the successful cases as well as quantification in the context of circular economy. But however, there is a need for a systemic change to gain transformative change through the implementation of the circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shora. Next, I would like to turn to Bonnie Holligan, also from the University of Sussex, who chaired a session on legal, financial and institutional aspects of combining climate adaptation and sustainable development.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so this was a really interesting session focused on the legal and policy aspects of connecting up the SDG and climate agendas, and also connecting up international water law as well. So our first presentation focused on local adaptation projects and how we can understand what local delivery of an adaptation project is, with a focus on the Green Climate Fund. And the conclusion from this was really that there's a great difficulty in finding adequate information, and there's a need to make projects more transparent and accountable. We also heard about the potential for transboundary cooperation on water and the potential of water energy exchange agreements, and how this has the potential to move to more efficient water uses, Continuing on the theme of water, we heard also about the interaction between international climate law and international water law, and the need to embed climate change considerations within the flexibility mechanisms available in water basin agreements, but also the need to think about water when drafting international climate law, and to the idea of equitable and reasonable utilization of water resources as something that should be fundamental in climate law. And finally, we heard about technology transfer and the international property law regime, and how this it acts as both a barrier to, and might also be used to further the climate change agenda. And again, how the potential for flexibility mechanisms in intellectual property agreements could be used in relation to taking climate action and to facilitate technology transfer that would lead to climate action. So we are talking at the moment a lot, for example, about how we might have technology transfer in terms of vaccine technology as a response to the health emergency. So, so there was some quite lively discussion about the potential for thinking about the climate emergency in a similar way, and what more can we do to free up either working within the existing regime to make use of the flexibilities available to encourage technology transfer. Some of the, just very quickly, some of the themes that ran, I think, through these presentations. First of all, the potential for synergies and the need for a joined up approach across these different legal areas, and the practical impact of the relationship, so where water agreements don't take account of climate, for example, the potential for that to cause problems, and so the need for joined up thinking, and also the importance of the environmental and climate justice angle here, and the fact that where, for example, water agreements or the intellectual property agreements aren't properly connected up to climate, you're also missing, not just from an ecological perspective, but from the perspective of justice, and particularly the poorest people being unable to access the technologies and the considerations that actually under the climate agenda they're supposed to have. And there's still a lot of work to do, essentially, in linking up these different policy agendas. But also, I think what we learned was the importance of context, and the fact that frustratingly for those from a legal background, you can have good laws and policies, but often it's also about the politics, and it's about the local context and history and politics, whether it comes to water or intellectual property rights. Those are also going to be really important in determining the success of some of these initiatives. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bonnie. Can I now turn to Daniel Carter, who was one of the co-chairs of the session on managing the water security climate change nexus through an SDG lens.
Thank you, Ruth. And our session was based on a specific project, the Global Water and Climate Adaptation Center, ABCD, in which the 4 letters stand for the 4 locations of the center: Aachen in Germany, Bangkok in Thailand, Chennai in India, and Dresden in Germany. This is a recently started project. And firstly, it was highlighted by one of our speakers that when we look at climate change adaptation, the greatest challenges are related to water. And as a very good example, the speaker showed some pictures of the very recent floods which struck Germany only a few days ago. The respective speaker was from the region that was affected by the floods. And basically it showed that even countries with modern infrastructures can be very strongly affected by such events, and that we do not only need to look at countries of the global south and see the challenges there. We then had a speaker who dealt with water security and the linkages to the SDGs. And basically he showed that water security is in some way linked to all of the 17 SDGs. And he highlighted the necessity of an operational water security index, and stated that this is very important, for example, for monitoring, but also for enhancing implementation measures. A comment that was made by several speakers, and I think that very well fits with this specific conference, but at the same time for me really marks a change as compared to what I heard at scientific conferences in the past, is that several speakers highlighted that academic projects need to look beyond research. They do research, but they need to look beyond, and that a project is only successful if in the end it has a societal or a policy impact. Another speaker mentioned that a core goal of academic projects should be empowering change agents. And this goes into a very similar direction. So it's not only the research on paper, but that in the end, people are trained and educated who will make a difference in practice. A very interesting point in our session came up through a question from the audience, which basically asked how scientists can make governments act if those governments are not really interested in environmental issues. And initially, and I was one of the first people answering the question, of course, it was stated that the power of a scientist is maybe limited when it comes to influencing political decision makers who are simply not interested in listening to science. But a very interesting comment then came up in our chat, namely that governments are interested in solutions. So if scientists can offer solutions that can be taken up, this could be a good way of packaging knowledge for policy and for management. And the person who asked this question is actually with us right now. Interestingly, one of our speakers then replied that even though solution orientation is a good thing, as a scientist, a lot of time really also needs to be spent on the problem and analysis. So as scientists, we really need to do a proper problem analysis in a really scientific way. And only once that is done, we should think about policy recommendations. So these were the core findings of our session.
Thank you very much indeed. We should have a report back from one final session, but unfortunately the chair of that session isn't available. That's the session on towards a green recovery and sustainable transitions in India. I don't know if anybody who attended that session would like to just briefly summarize it, if there's anybody available. If not, we can go to questions now. Do please put any questions in the chat box. I just, before, there's a question that I can see from Joe. which is to everybody, all of the chairs. Based on your discussions today and elsewhere, what do you think should be priority actions for aligning the climate and SDG agendas? I don't know, can we start with you, Daniel, since you're the last to speak? You waited the longest.
Yes, so I would say, based on particularly our session, of course, that considering water security as the main linkage between climate change and the SDG lens, I think this would be one of the priorities.
Thank you. Beth?
Sure, thanks, Ruth, and thanks, Joe, for the question. I think this is also tagging off a little bit of what Daniel was talking about the need to apply, solutions with actors who can really take them up. And so I would say a priority action for aligning these agendas would be really looking at, who are the actors, both at the global level and then at the national level and subnational levels who are responsible for implementing these agendas. So, national level entities and ministries who are responsible for the different aspects of these agendas. And we were talking in our session about how often those actors can be very siloed. And so looking for ways to bring those actors together at the national level to talk about what happens at the global level. The global level is often where we talk about this concept of cohesion among the agendas. So linking climate change with the SDGs, SDGs with human rights with climate change, and these questions that we're considering at this symposium itself of where are these interlinkages. It's the national level where often these conversations aren't happening and the resources to have these conversations are not available. So, mapping those linkages and then creating those forums at the national level can be one key action to move forward implementation of these agendas.
Thank you very much. Bonnie, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I guess I'm only really speaking from the perspective of, mostly from international law, which was the focus of our session. But I think what we learned is definitely the need to ensure that there aren't silos again, and that drafting of any agreement, whether it's related to water or related to other areas, there is a climate aspect and potentially also aspects that are related to SDGs. So it's about being able to connect up these different agendas and not putting climate as something that's away over there, and the importance of that really for equity and justice as well, and ensuring that that doesn't get left behind either when thinking about.
Great, thank you. I think both Shova and Sarah have had to leave early. So I wonder if there are any more questions. Okay, so thank you everyone for your wrap-ups. I think one of the things that for me has come out of all of those summaries of the sessions this morning is this issue of how to integrate across sectors, whether it's between climate and water, between climate and land and human rights, or between climate and the circular economy. And also, I think another thing that's come out has been about transdisciplinarity. So several of the summaries talked about projects that were ongoing that involved academics and practitioners and communities affected by climate change. And that to me seems to be a really important part of the discussions, and as well the discussions we were having this morning about locally led adaptation and linking local actions to impact at the global level and vice versa. So I think those are all kind of really important themes that have come out of this these discussions both this morning and this afternoon. Would anyone like to add any further comments from any of our chairs? Okay, well, in that case, I just we can end the session a little bit early. I know everyone's rather exhausted after day 2. So the next day of the symposium, the final day, is tomorrow, obviously, and it's starting at 9 o'clock with the opening plenary, which will be on the views of 2 governments, and will feature, I'm sorry, the writing's really small, Henry Kwabena Kokofu from the Ghana Environmental Protection Agency, talking about the viewpoint from Ghana, and then Lord McConnell of Glens Corridale, I hope I've got that right, talking about the view from the UK on leaving no one behind in the climate and SDGs. So I think both of those will be really interesting and be fantastic to have such views from different perspectives on the same issue. So I hope that'll be a great start to the final day tomorrow. And thank you everybody for your contributions today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great.